Hello. My name is Reverend Asha Burson Johnson. My personal pronouns are she, her, and it is my joy and my honor to be with you on this Wednesday Wisdom Talk. During this talk, we're going to be speaking about the word shift, as in shift happens. I don't know about you, but the last couple of years have felt like a bit of stasis or inertia. The words lethargic or lassitude, lethargy and lassitude came to mind. It's been an interesting roller coaster ride of ups and downs, getting our hopes up and then having them dashed again, constantly shifting into something else. A new frame of mind, an old frame of mind, feeling a little bit like the roller coaster of life. I looked up the words I can't say it now, lethargic. Lethargic means physical or mental inertness. And inertness is that principle that a body at rest tends to stay at rest. So when we feel lethargic, it's very easy to stay there. And lassitude is a great word. There was a great essay about lassitude about a year ago when we were only halfway through this pandemic we thought was going to be a lot faster. And lassitude, as opposed to physical or mental inertness, is mental or physical weariness. It's a great word. So when we're feeling stuck, when we're feeling lethargic, or this feeling of lassitude, what do we do? What can we do? How can we get this feeling of stuckness, this sense of inertia, to move through? We don't want to ignore it or try to crush it down or not acknowledge that that's how we're feeling. How do we allow it to move through? That's a question I've been wrestling with, and maybe you too. Shift will happen. That's guaranteed. There are only two changeless things that exist. One is spirit, the one life, love, the energy of the universe, whatever you want to call it. That is changeless. It exists, it always has existed, it always will exist. It itself is changeless. And the only other thing that's changeless is that there will be change. As much as we don't like it, or as much as we love it. I seem to like a bit of change. I think that's why I love to do community theater and lots of theater in my life, because there was always a new show, a new set, a new cast, something new to look at, something new to explore and discover. That's why I like rearranging my furniture every now and again, just to get a new point of view, just to shift the surroundings, the environment. So knowing that shift happens, knowing that there is change always, and yet sometimes we feel stuck. The change isn't coming the way we want it to, the shift isn't happening when and how we'd like it, our preferences. So what can we do? Chelsea Handler, a lovely comedian and a talk show host, and a bit of a philosopher actually, says everything isn't permanent, so don't pretend that it is. Everything's supposed to move and shift. Everything. So it behooves us to become comfortable with the stasis and the shift, the times that feel like we're not moving, and the times when we feel like everything's moving too fast, and everything in between. Can we be willing to make a shift? Being willing, even if we don't know how, to move out of this feeling of inertia, the body at rest tending to stay at rest. Sometimes the first step is, can I just be willing to shift, to move out of this sense of stuckness the resignation that it's always going to feel this way. It's the funny thing about emotions, isn't it? They feel so permanent when we're in the midst of them, whether it's love or fear or everything else in between those two very distant points from each other. It feels like, oh, it's always going to be this way. I'm always going to feel this way. And then 20 minutes later, we feel differently. But in the minute that we're in it, it's hard to feel that it's going to shift, that we're going to not feel crummy or ecstatic the whole time. This roller coaster I talked about earlier, the ups and the downs, the ebb and the flow. There's a beautiful lake nearby, Lake Crescent or Crescent Lake. I can never remember which it is. It's either Lake Crescent or Crescent Lake, but both, either way, there's Crescent in the name. And it's very often completely glassy, completely smooth, and it mirrors the entire environment around it. It's extraordinarily beautiful. And yet, there's something as beautiful, if not more beautiful, in the waves of the ocean and the way they shift and change and ebb and flow, constantly shifting into something new. The glassy lake is beautiful and peaceful, and it feels static, like a frozen image, whereas the ocean never stops moving, never stops changing. The shoreline. I spoke with someone a couple of weeks ago who talked about diving in Florida for all kinds of interesting things in an area that was not coral reefs. It was mostly a sandy bottom. But he said the way that the water would move is that sometimes he would dive there and it would be completely covered with sand, just sand, as far as the eye could see. And then other times he would dive down in the same place and there would be hundreds and hundreds of shells visible because the sand had been washed away in that particular time. So there was always something new because of the shift, because of the ability of nature to change and adapt. So we're moving into spring, which is very visible where we live. And there's a huge shift that's happened in the light, in the green and the pale green that's starting to come out, in the clouds of color that are starting to emerge, sometimes one day at a time. One day the tree is bare, and the next day it suddenly has color. The shift feels dramatic. And it feels like a time for us to shift, to move into this new season, out of the darkness of winter, out of the stasis and the stuckness. Can we be willing to shift? Halle Berry, the fantastic actress, said, if you set out to do something and you give it your all and it doesn't work out, be willing to modify your goal slightly. Have the ability to look in another direction. A small shift could guide you to the real purposes of your life. Not a huge earth-shaking shift. A small shift could guide you to the real purposes of your life. I've been feeling that sense. I set out to do something. I gave it my all, and it didn't work out exactly the way I planned. And I'm willing to modify my goal, my intention, to discover something new, to look in a new direction, and to do small shifts that may guide me to something that's a deeper purpose, even deeper than what I've already thought about, which felt pretty deep when I thought about it originally. If we can begin to create small shifts for ourselves, small incremental shifts, shifts in language and shifts in our perspective on our life, they can begin to kind of snowball, which is a weird metaphor to use as we go into spring. But like the unfolding buds on the tree where there was no color 2 days ago and suddenly there's color, these small shifts in language and perspective can help us move forward. Sometimes one baby step at a time, sometimes in great, graceful leaps. For me, I pay attention a lot to my languaging. What am I saying? Instead of what can't I do, can I shift that to what can I do? What seems impossible may be in fact impossible. But if I focus instead on what is possible for me, what is possible for our spiritual center, what is possible for my family, my marriage, asking curious questions. And one of my favorites is instead of saying I have to, the small shift in language of I get to. Instead of I have to do laundry, I get to do laundry because I have clothes and a washing machine. Instead of I have to dust, I get to dust because I have things that are beautiful and that I love. Instead of I have to speak more, communicate more, be more vulnerable, be more authentic, be brave in my communications, I get to do that. I choose to do that. Not that that's not scary sometimes, or may carry some feeling of risk, but I'm willing, and I'm willing. Are you willing? Are you willing to be willing? Sometimes that's even the pre-step. I'm willing to be willing as a start. So play with your language. Notice the tendency of your thoughts, the tendencies of your languaging. Are we talking about how terrible a person we are when we make mistakes, or that we're still learning? Maybe acknowledging the frustrated 3-year-old that wants to do it perfectly so they don't get in trouble or something. And just say instead, I'm learning. I'm discovering something new right now. I may not be great at it yet, but I might be someday. Shift happens. It is happening. It is what we choose to do with all of that that makes the difference. I invite you into the shift and see what you discover in your life that can help you move forward towards the purposes of your life. Kristin Armstrong, who's an athlete, says, it's not only moving that creates new starting points. I'm going to pause and do an aside here. Sometimes we feel like we have to change everything in order to shift. I have to move. I have to get out of this relationship. I need to change jobs. It's not just that, because wherever we do move to, or whatever new relationship we get into, we bring ourselves with us. So that's an idea, but it may not be the idea. So I start over. It's not only moving that creates new starting points. Sometimes all it takes is a subtle shift in perspective, an opening of the mind, an intentional pause and reset, or a new route to start to see new options and new possibilities. Maybe a way to break ourselves free from inertia, to do a small shift, is take a different route to work one day, or walk around your property in a different direction than you always do, or try something new for dinner. Small shifts can accumulate and add up to bigger changes, but we can start small. Take a breath. I'm excited to see what spring has in store for us and all the many shifts that are happening in this world. They feel very dramatic. And yet at the core of each of us is a wholeness and a power and an intelligence and a love and a compassion that we can move this world forward into a direction where it works for everybody. That's a big dream and a big goal, but we can take small steps, small shifts in the direction of this grand idea. Thank you for joining me on this Wednesday Wisdom Talk. I'll be back again on the second and fourth Wednesday of April. It's April already. I look forward to seeing you and being with you again. Make it a great day. Bye.